Hi, I'm Amber Young,
And I'm Barbara Phillips.
and this is
Let's Talk EVM. Yay, we did it.
Yay! Welcome. Today we have a great podcast for you, and I'm going to start with our disclaimer that I say for both myself and Barbara.
Yes.
And the disclaimer is that the views that are expressed on this podcast are our own, and they are not the views of the United States government. So with that, before we get into our guest and our topic, I'd like to pass it to Barbara for a soapbox moment.
Thanks, Amber. The thing I've been thinking about today is what a magnificent view I have here from the wharf in Southwest DC. But the other thing I wanted to tell everybody about is what's going on with regulation today and this new term streamlining. What does that really mean? It means throw the baby out with the bathwater, it seems like. It seems like people are so frustrated with the regulations they've been enduring that they can't seem to pick the best out of it and improve it. And I am going to give a little plug here for our esteemed guest, Wayne Abba. I'm going to go ahead and call him a legend.
Yes.
I just did it.
Yes.
I just did it, Amber.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't refer to himself that way, although he is going to tell us about how he's the father of the IBR. So I know I'm just giving you a sneak preview. But we are super jazzed. And actually, my soapbox moment is pretty apropos because this is something that is near and dear to Wayne about the role of a regulation in our business of earned value management. So now I'm going to hand it back to Amber to segue to
Our esteemed guest. Yes. So I wanted to just introduce our topic and our guest, and he will then introduce himself and we'll jump in. So today's topic is the weaponization of surveillance. I know many of us have felt it, seen it, and understand what that means. So we want to dig into that a little bit with Wayne. So first, I'd like Wayne to please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Barbara and Amber. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm enjoying the view too, Barbara, especially because I just flew down from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where if I were looking out the window, it would still be all white with just the beginnings of a little bit of green. So I'm Wayne Abba. I retired from the Department of Defense in 1999, where for the last 17 years, I served as the lead analyst for earned value management in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And I was brought into that role by my mentor, Gary Crystal, the late Gary Crystal, who's worked with me when I was at the Army Materiel Command and admired the natural fit between our management philosophies, the way we worked together and the way we looked at ethics and government. And when I got into EVM, I found that it was a very heavily bureaucratic process. And I give you a couple of examples of that. The Navy, for example, was conducting an earned value review up at one of their shipyards. And the way that the earned value review process, then called Cost Schedule Control Systems Criteria, or CS Square, the way that it had evolved was that they wanted to have a fully compliant management system description before they would agree to go in and look at the shipyard's management process. And to me, that didn't make any sense. And in this particular example, it took 4 years before the Navy was prepared to do that kind of a review. And not to pick on just one service, the Air Force, Gary Crystal sent me out on reviews with each of the services so I would have firsthand understanding of how the policy that we were responsible for was being implemented. Going out with the Air Force to an aircraft engine producer, the captain who was in charge of that review insisted that the contractor write a subcontractor management process, even though this prime contractor didn't use subcontractors. Everything was done within their organization. It's these kinds of things that I understood from the beginning give EVM a bad name and a reason for people to avoid it. So with that in mind, I set out to do some reform of the process with Gary. And he gave me a charter that ended up with me being pretty much the lead guy for all of this. And it all came to a head with a management reform era, an acquisition reform era with Clinton and Gore. And I'll come back to that in just a minute, but I wanted to say that the weaponization of EVM didn't end with the good things that we were able to do during that era. It's actually returned with a vengeance. And after Gary and I retired, after our 17 years together, we had delivered good results. We had the aggregate overrun on $84 billion worth of defense contracts reduced to 5.3%. And that was without smoke and mirrors. So we brought the receipts. To my knowledge, they didn't keep that statistic going after we left. But after we left, the programs began to have trouble again. Front page of the Washington Post, overruns, and a lot of criticism. So the department set out to fix that, and they did that by giving more authority to the people who were reviewing EVM down at Defense Contract Management Agency. And in the process of doing that, one of the things that they seized upon was to change the very definition of earned value from a management enabling process to a business system, and put it in with other business systems in the Federal Acquisition Regulation.
What were those other business systems that it was aligned with, Wayne?
You know, I don't have those at hand, but obviously accounting would be one of those, financial accounting. And earned value, of course, doesn't create accounts. It relies on the accounting system. It relies on the scheduling system. And it's an integrating management process. Estimating
is another business system. Material management is another business system.
Yes.
And to your point, those are things that are very, the word isn't transactional, but very, well, I don't want to use the word accountable, but
They are.
But EVM is a horse of a different color. Is that what
We
that
talk
is?
about EVM as the system of systems. It integrates all of the systems, and even though the EVMS doesn't have, they don't touch the accounting like you're saying, there's still touch points between the systems. The accounting system feeds into the cost processor for the EVMS systems, right?
And the most cruel thing, Wayne, weigh in on this, is when it used to be, I've been listening to Wayne for a long time. It used to be they would put on contract your CPI and your SPI shall be
Within some small variance from perfection.
and guess what they got?
Small variance from perfection.
And that leads towards the weaponization. Would you say that I see that SPI CPI as being a part of the metrics, being something that could potentially
Lead to poor behavior.
lead to poor behavior, as Barbara says? Yes.
Yes, and I can give you an example of that poor behavior. Again, after I retired, there was a implementation of earned value in a foreign government for one of our major programs in the U.S. And I happened to know the person who was involved with implementing that process in that country because we had worked together during my time in the Pentagon. And I asked him how the review went, and he said, well, it went pretty well. He said they brought in a team of people that was larger than the people we had on our project.
Oh, wow.
And he said they all had a list of questions, and he said they put their heads down and asked their questions, and when they got the answer, they would put a tick in the box. He said, but they didn't ask the question that we were prepared to answer but not volunteer. And I said, what was that? He said, well, we were given direction not to report any variances on this project for the first 2 years.
How would you know to ask that question?
Yeah, wow. Okay, boss says don't report any variances for the first 24 months. I mean, that's lunacy.
Yes, and that program is still very much alive today and continuing to have management problems, I would say. In the acquisition reform era under Clinton Gore, the way that we achieved our success was by working hand in glove with our industrial base. So we went with the National Defense Industrial Association And we put teams together that went around to all of our major contractors and all of our major buying activities. We made fishbone charts. You remember those kinds of things where you prioritize what the issues are and you work out ways to resolve them. And it worked. And it was a collaborative effort. And now with the business systems clause that's being implemented, we're using EVM not to work together with our contractors, but to find fault with them and to penalize their cash flow. And I don't know the degree to which that has been done, but on one program, I got to looking around in the open press, and I was able to track down well over $198 million. Now, at the NDIA meeting that we were at just a couple of weeks ago, I was making this point at the cocktail hour, and somebody told me that, well, within my company, I need a club to get people to do the right things. And she said, I like the business systems clause because it gives me clout to get the things done that I need to get done.
Okay, yeah, that is really, really scary. I know we have a list here, but Wayne, if we could just get like 1 or 2 minutes about the Avenger program and what the role was of EVM in its termination.
Sure. The A-12 Avenger was the first stealth attack aircraft that was developed by the Navy. The contractors were McDonnell Douglas and General Dynamics. And
What year was that?
what year? Oh my gosh.
Approximate.
Yeah, this was in the 1990s. And this program was highly classified. And it's important to tell you that I was not the analyst in the Pentagon who was overseeing this. It was, remember Bob Leach, of course.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so Bob went down behind locked doors and he looked at the earned value information on this because, to put it in context, it was when the Soviet Union was collapsing and the Department of Defense was looking for bill payers, looking for money for programs that could be canceled. Bob had come back to the office and he told Gary, he said, we have a disaster on our hands just from looking at quarterly level 1 earned value management information. And that, from that point on, that thing exploded. It was declassified. It became public news. People were fired. The project was canceled. Thousands of people were laid off just before the Christmas holidays out in St. Louis and down at General Dynamics. And as time went by, the contract was terminated for default. And the contractors, of course, contested that. And by that time, I had been brought on to the team as an independent expert because I wasn't involved in the oversight of that particular project by the Department of Justice and Navy litigation team. So I had an office over in Crystal City, and I'd go over there and look at the data. And I got a copy of Winsight to do some analysis for me and generate charts. And I would do this, and the legal team would bring this forward to the judge, and the judge would say, I don't want to hear about speculation about how the contract was going to come out. And so he refused to hear the EVM case for years. This case went on more than 20 years. And people had literally had offices set up. It generated millions of pages of documents. Many of them were duplicative, of course. But then I retired from the Department of Defense, and they hired me back as a consultant to continue to do that same job. And eventually, the court was told by an appellate court, by an appeals court, that he had to hear the earned value case. So the judge was, and it was the same judge through this entire span. So finally, after all those years, I had the pleasure, if you can call it that, of going over to the courthouse over next to the White House and testifying. And you want to hear a little more about it?
Yeah,
please.
it's riveting. I think it's riveting.
Well, the plaintiffs, the contractors, had tried very, very hard to keep me from testifying. When they saw the report that I had written, I had excised all of the information that talked about the speculation about what the contract outcome would have been. And so I was testifying only about failure to make progress, which was clearly shown by extremely unfavorable cost and schedule variances. And there's probably a lesson in presentation here too. The graphics people on the litigation team asked me how many slides I would need to explain earned value. And I said, well, I could probably do that in, 4 or 6.
I could do it in 2.
He said, do it in 2. So I did. I actually ended up being a little bit more than that, but I showed, and I realized I didn't have to educate this man. I just had to show him that this line represents your plan. This represents your progress against the plan. This variance represents failure to make progress. And when I got, they fought hard to keep me off the stand. Eventually I get called in. If you can imagine, I'm out in this courthouse. I've never testified in any kind of a court case before. And I'm cooling my heels, getting a little nervous as time goes by. But finally I get in there. We go through the whole thing. And the judge says, well, this testimony goes to the heart of this issue in a very effective way. Ooh. And the long story shorter, he reversed himself after 5 trials, having found for the plaintiffs in every case before then.
What's also like what we find, unfortunately, in the podcast is people have told us things, and then when they get talking, they don't retell things. But one of the other really interesting parts about your story, Wayne, is that the plaintiffs or the defendants were trying to keep the evidence out and, the performance data, and yet in those millions of pages that he described, it had already been entered into evidence. And he was able to leverage that and pull it out. Like even when they were trying to keep you down there, he's like, I'm not introducing new evidence. You all had it already in here. It's such a great punchline of that story. I know we have you on the mic and it's hard. So should we go on to the IBR?
Yes. May I?
Yes.
All right. I'm very excited and just so honored to share with the podcast and everyone listening that Wayne is actually the father of the IBR. He'll humbly tell the story, I think, and would love to hear how the IBR came about.
Well, going through all of this acquisition reform and so on, we realized that one of the main drawbacks with earned value was our failure to actually integrate it with technical performance as well as it should be. And so we thought that it would be a good idea, we being my boss, Gary Crystal, and I, to find a way to make that happen. And we had a New Start program. It was in the ballistic theater missile defense area. And Bill Smart was the earned value expert there in the project management office. And we said, well, how would we do this? And I said, well, let's have a review shortly after contract award to review the content of the performance measurement baseline and make sure that the technical requirements are understood and properly integrated with the cost and schedule management. So let's call it a technical baseline review. So in the decision memorandum for this program, we put in a sentence that said that they would do this technical baseline review within some period of time after the contract was awarded. And when the memorandum was ready to be signed, Gary was away from the office, and I got summoned down to the front office where the principal deputy was sitting with the director of defense procurement, and they were prepared to sign the memorandum, but they had a concern. They said, we look at this and we think this might be too limiting. To call it a technical baseline review, it might not get what you want. And I said, well, how about an integrated baseline review? And so it was.
That's great. Just a little wordsmith. Yeah.
That's really, really terrific. Oh, I'm so honored to hear these stories and wanted to open up a little bit and Barbara, just see if we want to talk about how we're all here today at the wharf together.
Oh, yeah. I love being here at the wharf. And why we're here. We're here because we were at the GAO Knowledge Exchange. What do they name it?
I think the name of this one is the Program Controls Knowledge Exchange. I'll go get my agenda.
Well, anyway, I'm going to go ahead and give myself a little soundbite. I know Wayne and I go back like to 2001, 2002, because I was a volunteer with PMI WDC, and we had the Knowledge Exchange Forum, and we invited, thanks to Wayne, Karen Ritchie, when she was still the lead, but I know she had a lot of champions, she's an amazing leader, and she's a great contributor, a great estimator. And when they were putting together the cost estimating guide over there at GAO, and we invited them as part of PMI WDC as an offsite all day meeting, and we called it the Knowledge Exchange Forum. And we were delighted to see that GAO isn't calling their meeting the experts meeting anymore. They're calling it the Program Controls Knowledge Exchange. So they have a forthcoming, they have it out for review with their closed environment, but the name of the new guide is called Project and go ahead.
I believe it's a project program management, uncertain of the order.
Yeah.
PPM.
Yeah. PPM, and it has 10 best practices in it. It's very readable. It's very usable. It's going to make a big splash. I'm sure we'll have a talk about that when we get to it. So I think the one other question we had for Wayne I had written down is I think we use the term club versus enabling, because in my personal experience, I was on an implementation where I couldn't make myself understood. Why do we do change control, Barbara? What's the purpose? Why do we need to do this? But if I had had surveillance on my project, I would have given my left arm for it. It would have added that credibility I needed in like where you're like out on a raft and you're the only EVM knowledgeable person on the project, and your job is to do the implementation. You're explaining it to the scheduler. So like, why do I have to code this? How does it help me do my job? And you're talking to the resource people for the budgeting and how they need to divide the work into this part. So they have to divide the period of performance by the things that are in the schedule. And they're like, how does this help me do my job? And it was hard for me to explain the greater purpose. And I don't believe in dotting the I's and crossing the T's to get, I don't really care when the work authorization document is signed. I know that's against the rules, but surveillance really would have helped me on that implementation. So Wayne, can you weigh in on surveillance as an enabler versus a club? Or Amber's going to contribute first, sorry.
Just a distinction on what is meant by surveillance, because I see it as internal versus external. There could be internal. You're talking external surveillance. Okay.
There's a level of accountability in government contracting that's different than you would expect when Elon Musk is spending his own money to develop something, for example. And it's hard to get that point across. One of the things, as you know, Ken Nishi is here visiting from Japan, and there's a very, very different management culture in Japan versus here. And just to simplify it, the Japanese culture has always been based on firm fixed price contracts and no sharing of information. And the environment here, of course, has evolved quite differently with cost type contracts and the need to have information. The best way that I can address the issue you raise is through the efforts that we made through acquisition reform to get government and industry working together, and then embodying that philosophy in the integrated baseline review. And I've been to IBRs where I went in and one of the contractor people said, "Oh, we're going through this stuff again." And another one said to him, "No," he said, "this really does make a difference. This matters."
So it's senior leadership support.
Yes, absolutely. And I used the phrase self-inflicted wounds today. I was on an IPT once where we actually had people from the Pentagon involved in the IPT early on in program development, because there was going to be a big WBS and there were planning things that needed to be addressed. And the program had two ways that it could go. And I might as well tell you, it was the Crusader mobile gun program. The idea was to stop using solid propellants for artillery and to use liquid propellant. And so they set out to use liquid propellant because it would be far more precise and it would be easier to transport and so on. There was one small problem with that. Liquid propellant is somewhat volatile. And so they got to a certain phase of the project and they were briefing in the Pentagon, and the briefer said, sir, we have a problem with spontaneous disassembly during the testing. And the executive who was taking the briefing said, well, could you expand on that? The briefer said, well, sir, the gun blows up. And leading up to that point, or after that point, they made the decision to go back to solid propellant. But they called us together over here in Crystal City for a IPT meeting to announce to the IPT that decision had been made. And I stood up and said, am I the only one here who feels he's wasting his time?
Wow.
Because you've made a decision and the IPT doesn't know?
Wow.
And he said, well, it was a general in command. He said, well, you have to appreciate that this was very sensitive. And so we needed to keep it kind of close hold. And I said, well, thank you. You added insult to the injury. And he said, well, what would you have us do? And I said, well, I'd have you go across the street and learn from the Navy how to conduct an IPT. And they did that.
Good.
So that the next time we got together, there on the stage were people from the using element, people who would be responsible for maintenance, the project manager, the contractor, and we had that open exchange that is intended for this kind of thing. So that's a long way with an anecdote thrown in to say again that we need teamwork. We need responsible teamwork, and that takes leadership on both sides of the table. And you need to have reliably objective data in order to inform your decision making.
This has been great.
I know.
I'm just
music to my ears always.
in awe. This is just tremendous. I know there's so many more things we can talk about, but we're kind of at the end of our designated time. So want to do a little round robin for any closing thoughts, maybe reflecting back on the weaponization of surveillance. Anything you want to leave us with, Wayne, Barbara, any closing thoughts? And there's no amblings for me because I'm just in a state of reverence. So.
Well, I'll leave it the same way I left the GAO meeting today. When they asked about items for future consideration, I suggested that the use of EVM for this kind of purpose, for finding fault with contractors and penalizing them for it, be looked at now that it's been in place for some years and see what contributions it's made to the discipline or perhaps what damage may have been done. My expectation is that it's the latter, that the kinds of things that you're seeing, Barbara, that you described today are people running away from EVM because the last thing you want to do is get yourself associated with something that's going to put you in that kind of a spotlight or expose you to that kind of oversight or whatever might be going on. And, you know, that goes hand in glove with what happened with the National Defense Authorization Act a couple of years ago. Somebody got language into it that said you don't have to do earned value for software contracts. Well, that had no substance behind it whatsoever. And what does that mean when software, IT, is part of a weapons system,
Right,
or a DOE process or whatever it might be? It completely defeats the purpose of integration of management systems. And to be fair, there are some organizations that are doing it very well. And we talked about them at GAO as well, such as the National Science Foundation.
Yeah. Well, that concludes my remarks as well. And so that's it from
Let's Talk EVM.